In this video, we're going to take a look at a basic introduction to what AppForms is. Here I have a tenant loaded and I'm navigated to the app side of this demo tenant. You'll notice at the top we have a header border with the ClaySys logo here. And you may see this as either a little gear icon with some links on it, or in some cases, depending upon the style applied, you may just see these home designer and managed tenant links laid out horizontally across the header. But in any case, what we want to take a look at right now in this video is we're going to look at these links and the information that's contained underneath and within those particular topic points. So if you first click on home, it's going to basically take and load. In this case, I have a blank form that's loading, and that's set up within the navigation settings for this particular tenant. We'll take a look at that in a little bit more detail in a moment. But clicking home will take you and navigate you to whatever the form is that's designated as the load or startup form for the tenant. As I mentioned, you've got a header bar here, and this information or this style and whatnot of this header can be modified, and that can be set with some branding styles and that can be applied and customized. And we'll speak a little bit more about that in this video, but there's also going to be another video that's going to cover the AppForms branding topic in more detail. If you click the designer link, that's going to take you by default to this Forms Explorer view. And in this particular case, again, we're under the demo tenant, and I've created a demo folder to house the forms for this particular tenant. You'll notice on the left-hand side of the window, you've got a tree view control that you can expand, and this will show you the demo folder and all of the contents underneath it. There's also an expand all button above, and if you check that, then that's simply going to just expand the folders. If you click on the demo folder, then to the right, you're going to get a content view of the contents that are contained within that folder. In this case, we've got several forms that I've created in various states of check-in, check-out. Within the menu above, as I mentioned, we looked at the expand all. There's also an add folder button, and you can simply use that to add a folder. It can be a top level folder. It can be a nested folder. So if I click add folder here, then I've got a new folder that's inserted within the demo folder. Within that new folder, you can again add additional folders. You can add forms, etc. So basically, you can get pretty granular if you need to with the grouping of the folder structure and grouping of your forms, depending upon what your needs might be. I'm going to move back up to the demo folder. The next item in the toolbar list above here is the add form. So if you click that, again, that's going to just prompt you to give it a form name. And I'll call it test123. We'll click OK. And that created the form and opens it up in the designer. If I click the X here, that will take us back to our Forms Explorer view. And there's my new form. The next button is the View History button. So this was kind of cool. AppForms has its own built-in versioning, history versioning for the form. So basically, whenever you check in a new form, then that will create a new version of the form, and we maintain history and settings for that. You can customize and add comments to it. But the cool thing is, by default, without you really having to do anything, you can keep track and see kind of what changes were made. And if you need to revert those changes, then there's functionality to do that. So let's take a quick look at that. I'm going to select this demo calc form that I've created, and we'll view history for it. Okay, what you'll initially see in the form history window is a listing of the versions. In this case, I've checked it in 4 times. You can click one of the versions and click the view button, and it'll give you a quick designer view of what that form looks like. You can get a summary of the rules, and if there's any detailed information found there, it will show that. Additionally, if there were any comments that I added when it was checked in, they will show up here. But let's take a look with the comparison feature. So let's say I wanted to compare versions 3 and 4 of the form. I can click on one, control click, and then click the other one to highlight both. Then click compare. And here we have a side-by-side view of version 3 and 4. If you scroll to the right, then it's highlighted this subtract buttons or subtract variables button that I added. So that's something that's new in version 4 that wasn't there in version 3. So it will highlight any controls that were added or removed. If you click rules, then it's going to highlight that I had also added this on btn subtract variables rule. And you can actually expand it and see what the rule does. And lastly, if you click details, it's going to again give you an indication that there was a new control called btn subtract variables button that was added to the form. Last thing I want to mention again, as I mentioned before, comments. There's no comment on this one, but I did add a comment to this one, and so you can see that that's added there. So let's say something happened during testing or something, and for whatever reason, this update that was applied has caused some issues with the users. What you can do, and you know this version 3 was a very stable version, what you can do is simply click this option to roll back, and it will ask you sure you want to roll back to this version. If you click OK, you'll get a rollback complete. Now I have a 5th version that's listed. If I click the view here, you'll see that the button's been removed, the rule no longer exists, and we are now rolled back to version 3 effectively of the form. So very, very nice functionality there, very useful to be able to keep track of what changed. And again, if you might need to do a rollback on that. Couple of other buttons here at the bottom. The archive form versions gives you an option to be able to archive if you had a large number of check-ins, or if you just wanted to clean this up a bit. It'll give you the option of archiving all but the last version or the most recent version, so you can archive that. But let's say I wanted to archive 3 versions of the form, so I can just click start. Now notice that versions 1, 2, and 3 are no longer showing. If I, for whatever reason, might need to restore them, then I can click the restore button and they will be back in the list. Additionally, that pretty much covers that. So let's go ahead and close this. The last option here is manage security. And I'll just briefly pull this up. There will be another video that is going to be available that's going to cover this in far more detail than what I will here. But what this does is you have AppForms has its own security model that's applied to it, and you can get very granular. You can limit permissions on the app itself, the form itself at runtime. To the point of you can limit it down to certain users or groups having access to certain controls even on the form. It gets that granular, but you can create users, groups, associate users to groups, apply permissions to either the users or groups level, etc. And again, there'll be a video that goes into far more detail than this, but just know that there's a great level of security that's available here, and a very granular level of security that you can apply if needed. If you right-click an item within Forms Explorer view, you'll get a right-click context menu. So notice in this case, I right-clicked on a form. There's an add folder option. You have an add form option, rename folder, delete folder, change icon. If you click this, you'll get an icon viewer dialog that provides a list of built-in icons. And if you see something there that you might want to use for the folder icon, so let's say you want to change it to this icon, you can select that and click OK. And notice now that the folder icon for this particular folder has now been updated. You can also copy paste. There's a security item which will load the security manager dialog, and you have an option to upload a form. We'll take a look at that in a moment. If you right click on a form, you have the option to edit form, view the history, which is similar to clicking the view history link above. You can download the form, upload form, delete form, and copy. So let's quickly take a look at the download form and upload form items. So in the event you might need to move the form or copy it to another server, let's say, you can easily, if you only want to move like a single form and not transfer the entire tenant, you can right click on the form you want to download or to copy over and click this download form option. This will load the download form dialog. You can just simply click download, and notice it generates a zip file, and by default, if you show the show in folder here, it's going to be within the downloads folder for your particular user account. Also, if you have a need, or once you've downloaded it, when you go to the other server, if you want to upload it, you can simply right click on an empty area in the within the Forms Explorer view and select Upload Form. You have two options here. One's an import data sources. So if your form that you downloaded or that you're wanting to upload in this case contains data sources to a SQL server or web service, then you can, by checking this, it'll import the data source configuration settings for the form as well. So we'll check that. Click this button and it'll take you to a browse dialog. So in this case, I'll just simply re-upload the form that I downloaded just a moment ago. So you click OK. That then populates the zip file, and then you just simply click the upload button. You should get an imported successfully notification, and here is your form that you just imported, or uploaded rather. You can also right-clicking on a form, delete a form, and you can also copy it. So if I wanted to move it from this location to standard controls, I could simply just copy it, go into standard controls, and paste it. So that's just a quick overview of the right-click context menu items that are available within the Forms Explorer view. The last thing on the toolbar here is a question mark. If you click that, the help is going to redirect you to the online help documentation for AppForms, so I won't bother with clicking that. If you click About, you're going to get a dialog that's going to give you your version information, version number, that it's AppForms Enterprise Edition, etc. So that's helpful if there's some troubleshooting needed. A lot of times you're going to be probably asked for the version information, so that's a quick and easy way to go find that. So the other information I want to cover under the designer is if you click this hamburger menu here to the left, so the first item is the Forms Explorer. And so the next item is the Forms Recycle bin. In the Recycle bin, you will get a listing of all of your forms or folders that had been previously deleted. In this list, you can kind of tell what type of object it is. In this case, forms for me. The path where they were located, who deleted them, when they were deleted, and if you want to, you can restore them. You'll have the option to do that. Or if you want to purge out your recycle bin, there's an option to go through and delete these as well. Additionally, if the list was long, you also have an option to search by title, which is going to let you search by the name. So if I typed, for example, demo, then I'm going to get a listing of the filtered results. So that's very useful in the event that you may have a large number of items here to work through. Transaction log, I don't have any items here, but if you had any requests that were going to an external web service from your AppForms, then they're going to show up in here. You can see when the request was sent, when it was responded to, the user that sent it, if there was an error code or error data. It's very useful to help troubleshoot if you're having some sort of issue with either the data going out or the data coming back from the web service. Tenant settings, these are tenant level settings that you can enable or disable for this particular tenant that you're in. They range from anything from like quick menu, which is a little pop-up properties window that you'll get when you add a control to the designer. You can turn that on or off. You've got some security settings. If you turn that on or off, then that's going to affect the form security and all these other items that are listed here. There will be another video to go more in depth into what these settings do, so I won't cover them directly here. But I did want to point out there's also a beta version tab. So in your build of AppForms, there's going to be some options if you would like to go through and test some of these beta features that you can turn them on or off as desired within your environment or within the specific tenant. So that if you want to test those early, you can kind of see what they do. Transaction settings. These are some settings that you can apply that they can be customized for whatever your needs might be. For example, in this SQL transaction management, by default, we're going to restrict the maximum number of records pulled back from a SQL select. By default will be 100. That's to help reduce load on the server when there might be a very large data set. This can be customized as needed, but be aware that by default it's going to only pull back 100 records. Web service transaction logs. These are logs that, again, are the request and response logs coming from or going to an external web service. This is on. If you turn that off, then that's going to disable those transaction logs. Exception logging. These are this is off by here, as you can see, but you can turn it on. What this will allow you to do is help in issues where you might need to debug a behavior where someone is seeing an issue, but you may not be able to reproduce it on your side. You can turn this on, and this will allow you to get exception information from what that user might be seeing on their screen. Application monitor, you have two options here. And either JSON, which is listed as preferable because it's faster and it only deals with process completions, and these are flow of forms created in AppForms. There's another option if you want more detail. That's a SQL option. It logs every action, even ones that don't complete. Probably more helpful in a diagnosis state if you've got something failing than the JSON log would be, but again, it's going to be slower. So just depending upon what your needs are, you can set that, and then you have an option of turning it on or off. Rules execution monitor. This is pretty cool if you're trying to debug some issues with rules. What this will do is allow you to collect logging of what rules are getting executed, and you can kind of see the order of execution. So maybe if something's not happening that you expect to happen, you can take a look at this. You can turn this on, collect a log of the of executing the process, and see if what you think should be being called is actually getting called or not. So they do note that both of these options can impact performance. So by default they are off, but again, if you need to troubleshoot, then they offer some options to help you with that kind of with those types of scenarios. So you can easily turn them on, collect the information you need, and then turn them back off. Navigation settings. I briefly mentioned this a bit earlier when we were talking about the home link. So what this will do is allow you to pick the startup form for your site or your subsite. In this case, as I mentioned, I was using the blank form, so you can easily just pick whatever form you want. You'll notice the value changed there, and then you just need to come down and click Save to apply that. So I'm not going to actually save it, but that option's there. Menu navigation. This is an option where you can enable top level navigation or left side navigation. What this will do is put a little menu, like you can here I could pick a series of forms to show up, and then they will be listed on the left hand side so that you could pick and navigate to those forms. There's also workflow navigation, which will be discussed in more depth when we're talking about the workflow functionality of AppForms. Back up and restore. This is an option where you can easily take your forms or your tenant, and it can be pretty granular. You can either take the entire list of forms in the tenant, or if you want to specifically back up certain ones, you can see that they can each individually be selected or deselected. If you have any data forms, which in this case I do have one here, I can either check it this way, or if I had multiple, checking that will check all of them. That will also allow you to export the data for those data forms. Additionally, you can export the global menu, navigation settings, security groups, workflow, and application settings when you export your tenant or your forms as well. So all you would do is select the items you want, click export, and it's going to generate a zip file that you could then use and take to another server and load that zip file, and that would follow the import site, which again you would just click the choose file, select your zip file that you wanted to upload, and then just click the load button, and that will load that tenant up on the other server. There's also a rollback tenant, and these topics will also be discussed in more depth in another video. But this will allow you, if you had, in this case I don't think I have any prior versions, but if I had prior versions of the tenant, then I could select the tenant. It's going to list me whatever versions that are available, and I can roll back the tenant to that prior version if I needed to. User management is going to give you a list of all the users that you currently have set up within AppForms. If there are any disabled users, that will be available here as well. You'd have the option to add users. There is one thing that's kind of useful here is on the active users, you can see the license purchased count. So that's easy to kind of keep track of how many licenses you have available. If you needed to increase or upgrade your AppForms license, there's a link here to click to do that. Additionally, you can, if needed, go in and disable any users, or also print a list of active users if that's needed. Event logs is going to give you an ability to see all the errors and warnings that were generated on the server. Most of these settings that I've been showing you, or all of them so far, have been tenant level, but event logs, as it's noted here, will include errors across all of the tenants. So you have the option to do a select all and download whatever's available for the entire range of dates that's there. Or if you have a specific date in mind, you can filter the items to that particular date, and then download log would download the file to your downloads folder. Task scheduler gives you an option to schedule a form to be loaded. So you give it a task title, the URL, a timeout if you needed to, or for whatever the timeout might be, a start date and start time, and an end date and end time. You can also specify an interval for which the form will be relaunched, and once that interval expires, then it will try to relaunch it. If there's no interval specified, then it's only going to launch once. But you can also exclude the days, or set the days that you want this to occur. But if there's any time you might need to launch a form for a particular reason, then you can certainly just go through the scheduler item or scheduler functionality here, or feature here, and then be able to schedule that as needed. AppForms settings allows you to configure several items here. One is related to mail service, so you have the ability from within AppForms, if needed, to send emails. So this will allow you to configure email services. Active Directory is useful for syncing your Active Directory information. So you may need to populate that. For importing user data, and CAPTCHA settings, you can enable and specify these settings for any type of CAPTCHA authentication you might want to enable. AppForms Branding, again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, and I'm not going to go into great depth in this case because, again, there will be a video devoted to this. But what you can do here is this will allow you to create your own brand or select one of the built-in brands that you can apply. As you can see, in my case, the demo tenant is mapped to this demo brand that I created. So if you wanted to, you could just create new brand. You can inherit from one of the templates that's available here. You'd specify a name, check what tenants you want to map to this, etc. There's also the ability to customize. You do that from one that actually exists. Sorry about that. And I can't do that one. So let me pick one that already exists and has been saved. You have the ability to customize the login page if you had a forms-based authentication or AppForms-based authentication login. That would allow you to come in here and customize this with different font settings, colors. If you had some custom CSS you want to apply to that, you can do that. And then lastly, there's the capability of going and customizing the header and fonts and other types of features, which again will be covered in more detail in another video. So the last section is dealing with data management. So I'll just briefly cover these. The first is data source settings. So whenever you set up your tenant and you want to utilize data connections, you'll need to come into your data source settings and configure those. You have the option for SQL, web service, RESTful service, or Azure table. You would go in and create whatever connections you need. And as you've seen, I've got 2 set up here. And then once these have been created, they are available then for any forms in that tenant to be used to access data from those sources. Session variables, you can create session variables to store information for a user for that session. They are specific to the user, but they are available to any forms that user might interact with within that session. You also have application settings that you can go in, and they're a key value pair. So basically you can set up, if you wanted to provide some variables for things that might be specific to this form or to this application that you're building, and would be like static data that you can populate and then make available to the forms, then that's maybe something you want to come in and set up here and use those. Global rules, there's an option to create specific rules that would then be available to any form that's open within the tenant. These are rules that you can create and then utilize across all the forms. They don't have to be written in every form. So maybe you have a particular rule or piece of logic or something that you want to be able to call for multiple different forms, but you don't want to have to go through and create the rule for every individual form. You can come into the global rules, and there's a rule editor here that looks very similar to the rules pane within the form. You can specify parameters for the rule. They can range from anywhere from basically any type of control that's available to just a plain variable. You can specify that. And so let's say for a dummy rule, I want to pass an age parameter to this rule, and I'll save that. We'll call this sorry, GR for global rule is minor. I'm also going to change the name here. Now I can add a decision, and I'm going to use my variable VH less than 18. Then I'll simply just return a message box. And if they're over 18, then I'll throw a message box. It's not minor. So once you fill out your rule, you just click Save Rule. If I go back to Global Rules now, you'll see there's my global rule. If I wanted to download this and maybe take it to a different AppForms server, you can download it and then upload the rule. There would be that option. If you want to delete it, there's a delete option, and there's also an edit option. So let me just show you quickly how you can utilize that. So if I open up my blank form in the designer, I'm not going to check it out because I just want to demonstrate how to call and execute this. So you would call global rule method for function, pass it the rule name, which is going to list any global rules there. And then because we're passing a parameter, you just comma separate and then provide a parameter. This could be a hard-coded value like I'm using here. It could be a value coming from a control such as text box one.value, just wherever you want to pull the value from. And now if we preview this and I click the button, it will run the rule and I'll get as minor. If I change that value to 21 and run it again, it's not minor, it's returned. So just again, very easy to implement, very easy to call, and it's very powerful again, especially if you've got functionality that's going to need to be available for multiple forms. I would suggest, if possible, utilizing a global rule because it will make the creation of the function or the rule much easier, and maintaining it is going to be much easier as well, because you have a central point that you would just need to come back and edit if you needed to make a change versus, having to go through 10, 15 forms and update the rule in each one of those. Last item here is the global menu. So you do have the option of creating menus that can be loaded up within a form. The menu can be loaded by default whenever the user navigates to the form or to the site, tenant where the form resides. You can also use the menu open function and menu close functions to dynamically open and close the menu as needed as well. So that covers the designer piece. Manage tenant. Whenever you need to create or a new tenant, then basically you would go to manage tenant, provide a tenant name, and then save. So I'll call this, we'll just call this demo 2, for example. Now I would immediately get navigated to the designer for that tenant. If I go back to manage tenant, now I have demo 2 listed here. So if you have any questions about or need a direct URL to the tenant, if you click the tenant in question, then you're going to get a designer URL, an HTML designer URL, and a site URL. So site URL is where your end users would typically navigate to, and if you're going to do design work, then you would probably be utilizing this HTML designer link. The last item is the profile control or button. In this case, that's utilizing my information. You can click the settings, and this will differ again based on the branding or styles that are applied. In this case, I have this option to edit profile information for myself. So anything from initials, first name, email, phone, etc. Load a profile picture if I want it. That can be entered and updated. And you also have the option to log out and log back in as a different user if you needed to do that. For testing purposes, this can be beneficial when you're building an app and you may need to be able to run the form as a different user to test certain functionality. I hope that you found this video beneficial. Please view our other AppForms training videos for more in-depth tutorials regarding AppForms, as well as our how-to videos that show you how to implement various tasks within your AppForms solutions. Thank you.